Seems logical, doesn't it? Let's start with verse 4 in 2 Corinthians chapter 1. Let's start with verse 3. Blessed be God, even the Father of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Father of mercies and the God of all comfort, who comforts us in all our tribulation, that we may be able to comfort them which are in any trouble, by the comfort wherewith we ourselves are comforted of God. For as the sufferings of Christ abound in us, so our consolation also abounds by Christ. And whether we be afflicted, it is for your consolation and salvation, which is effectual in the enduring of the same sufferings which we also suffer, or whether we be comforted, it is for your consolation and salvation. And our hope of you is steadfast, knowing that as you are partakers of the suffering, so shall you also be of the consolation. For we would not, brethren, have you ignorant of our trouble which came to us in Asia, that we were pressed out of measure above strength, insomuch that we despaired even of life. But we had the sentence of death in ourselves, that we should not trust in ourselves, but in God, which raises the dead, who delivered us from so great a death, and does deliver, in whom we trust, that he will yet deliver us. Paul's talking about trouble. Anybody ever have any trouble in your life? Huh? You know, trouble is, it's no respecter of persons. Everybody has trouble from time to time. And Paul's talking about some of the troubles that he had had. And he's saying, I had some of these troubles and had to go through some of these things, basically, so you don't have to. And as I survived these things in the Lord, he says that I'm able to console or to comfort or to show you that you can trust in God. He said we had situations that if we were trusting in ourselves, he said all we could expect was to die. But he said, but we didn't trust in ourselves, we trusted in God. Now, trusting in God's a very, very important thing. And, you know, and sometimes, you know, if you don't have a great relationship with him, it's very kind of hard to do. If you don't know him, don't know his ways, don't know about him, it can be very difficult. But you know, the people that founded this nation, they understood about trusting God. You know, we went through a situation here right in our area where, what was there, 300,000 people without electricity? Some people were without electricity for almost 2 weeks. People were mad. I saw signs and people were talking about how they had to go to bed early and they had to light candles and they had to do this and they had to do that. And I thought, you know, we've become so dependent upon electricity and power that makes you kind of wonder how people survived without it. But somehow they did, didn't they? So we get to trusting in all the things around us sometimes, and it sometimes can be difficult to trust in God because you've never actually seen him face to face. Oh, you've seen his people, and sometimes that doesn't really help too much. But you've not actually seen him in person. But as you get to know him and you get to learn about him, and as you go through experiences in life and you trust him in those things, and what happens is your trust and your faith begins to grow and begins to develop. And Paul said that he had reached a point, he said, even in the face of death, that if we had to trust ourselves in some of the situations that we're in, we would have been dead. But we didn't trust in ourselves, for we trusted in God. The founders of this nation understood that. They came here at a time when there were Indians, there were animals, there was no cities, there were no roads, much less no electricity. And they came here and they trusted in God. You can see it in their writings, in the Bill of Rights, in the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence, that they trusted in God. It's on our money. In God we trust. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe it is the slogan of the state of Ohio. But do we really trust him? Well, Paul says it's very, very important to trust him. He says in verse 10 that we can trust in God, and he says that there are 3 dimensions of deliverance that God gives to us in times of trouble. Look here, he says he has delivered. He's already done it. It's not that we're hoping for him to do something that he hasn't already done. There's much to be said about a track record. Hello.
Yes, that's right.
If you had some kind of repair perhaps on your automobile and you went to an automobile mechanic and people told you, say, you don't want that guy to work on your car. Why? Well, he never was able to fix one. He'll cost you a fortune. Well, you're not going to mess with him. You're going to go to somebody who has a track record. Are you listening to me? Somebody that has a good record of being able to offer service. Someone that has a good record of being able to deliver what was promised. So Paul said, God has delivered. He has delivered. He has a track record of delivering people out of affliction and troubles. And much more than that, he says not only has he delivered, look what he says in verse 10, he says he does deliver. Past tense, he's already done it. He's got a track record, and he does deliver. In other words, he's still doing it. One of the most amazing things that I ever learned in my life came about in 1981. Having been raised in church, but getting away from the Lord for many, many years, coming back to the Lord, and going to a church that believed in the miraculous and the supernatural. Didn't know about those things before in the churches that I went to, but I found out that God is still in the miracle business. I knew that He had done miracles because I'd read about them. I'd read about them in the Bible. I'd read about them in books. I'd heard stories about the things God had done, but I was simply thrilled and amazed to find out that not only has He done those things, but He still does those things today. The book of Hebrews says that He's the same yesterday, today, and forever. In verse 10, he says He has delivered. He does deliver. And look here. He says He will deliver. He's going to. He has. He's got a track record. He has delivered. He does. He's still doing it. And He's still going to do it. He's still going to bring deliverance into people's lives for those that trust Him. In Daniel chapter 3, we see the 3 Hebrew children that thrown in the fiery furnace. You see, Nebuchadnezzar had been kind of bamboozled by some of the lawyers. How many of you know that happens sometimes? And so they'd made a law that anybody that didn't worship Baal, what they're going to do, they're going to kill them. They're going to kill them. And so what happens is these 3 Hebrew children, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, which is not their real names. It's Hananiah, Azariah, and Mishael is their Jewish names. They said, we're not going to do that. They said, we're going to throw you in the furnace. They said, well, you know what? We're just not going to worship your God. You see, our God is able, they said. He has the ability. You know, Paul talking about He has delivered, He does deliver, and He will deliver. They said He has the ability to deliver. And they say, and He's willing to do it. So they understand about the willing part. And the third thing they said, and if not, if our theology's wrong, we're not going to serve you, stinking God, anyway. See, trusting God in verses 3 and 4 tells us it brings comfort. You know, we didn't have any damage at our house and didn't lose any electricity over the storms. We didn't. Rhonda I were out on a motorcycle the other night, rode in the driveway. I think it's Thursday night. The neighbor comes running up and he says, have you seen this tree over here in your side yard? See, he could see it from where he sits in the porch in his house. And I said, no, and I went over there, and sure enough, there's a tree that was split right down the middle. It was just, just a little bit of gap there, but it wouldn't take much for it to just fall over on my fence. Well, I tell you what, that upset me a little bit, because I didn't want it falling on my fence. I didn't want it falling on me. So I thought, I got to do something about that. Well, the only thing, it was almost dark, and the only thing that I had was a motorcycle strap tie down that, when you put a motorcycle on a truck or a trailer or something, you tie it down with.